How are the six concepts of real and universe complete?
No, that's actually a good way to do it. So, for instance, you can think about choice, change, and creation as contents, and creation, existence, and interaction as contexts. In which case, that particular pairing and that um, set of six ends up becoming complete. It's because again, think about what would be incomplete. Incomplete would be something like there was some concept that was outside of this scope. Well, this was part of the example we were talking about when we said creation and existence and interaction. Is there anything that is within the scope of the notion of universe that isn't fully subsumed by the scope of those three concepts in a totalizing sort of way? So in effect, if we take the notion of universe as essentially being an absolute concept, i.e., that it's not in sense of our observing it, it's there in some sense, right? And whether we consider that to be some sort of Platonic ideal is another idea. But the notion here is that is there anything that is in the universe, in the old style of using the word universe as a container, that is not possible to understand completely in terms of creation, existence, and interaction? Okay, so in that sense, the notion of the universe as a totalizing concept is complete. So then we can say, okay, that's a context, right? Because it's a totalizing. It's basically we're saying that the sum of these three things equals this total thing. And these three things are themselves totals of a kind, the total of everything that's knowable about creation, the total of everything that's knowable about interaction, and everything that's knowable about existence, right? So in a sense, we're dealing with three totals themselves totaled. And so, however we're looking about it, it's the idea of a total is effectively a kind of context. Elements of that total would be content. And I'm thinking integers in that case. If we're talking about the total of all real numbers, then I would be talking about the continuum. But still, it's a kind of context in which the notion of number is held. So, in this sense, if we think about not in the third person of the sort of totalization concept, but in the first person of choices I make, changes I experience, and causation happening, right? Causation I observe, right? That in that particular sense, those are contents. They are firsthand experiences in the first person. There's no totalization implied, but it is an instance of something.
Okay.
Is it the case that the notion of existence is essentially somehow described or fully describable in terms of the notion of causation? And in some sense, we could say, well, yeah, that's not too unlikely, right? Um, what about the notion of interaction as a totalization concept as being held within or as having elements of changes? That in effect, I'm taking the notion of change as being components that, when added all together, create the notion of interaction. Well, that doesn't seem too far fetched. And then when I think of choices as essentially being, component elements of creation, well, that also works. So then we can ask, well, is there anything about um, creation that isn't choice? Is there anything about interaction that isn't change? And is there anything about um, existence which isn't described by causation? And to a large number of people's minds, the answer to those questions just happens to be no. Now, at this particular point, we could start to meditate on that and think about it for a while, but there's a reasoned sense in which it feels good enough, right? And if we basically say that the notion of the real is subsumed by choice, change, and causation, that is we're therefore taking the partial totalization of that this concept is essentially fully held by these other concepts. Then if we basically create any notion along the lines of that the universe exists or the universe consists of only that which is real, then we're now compelled to hold these particular identities, i.e., that the notion of change is the basis of interaction, that the notion of causation is the basis of existence, and that the notion of choice is the basis of creation.